Hi friends, it's Cindy Lyon from Greetings and Memories. Today I'm going to show you how to make a card with a little bit more masculine look to it using the feathers from our Tasteful Touches stamp set and some of the wood grain designer series paper from the In Good Taste designer series paper set. So let me move this out of the way. For those of you who are joining me for World Card Making Day, and if you got the supply kit in the mail, what you'll find in there is one Whisper White medium envelope that we'll set aside for the time being. And then we have a thick Whisper White card base. We have a scrap of white cardstock that we'll be using to stamp the feathers in the greeting. And then you have a square of your designer series paper. Like I said, I'm going to be using the wood grain pattern, but since that is double-sided paper, if you'd rather use the, I guess that's kind of a fabric looking texture there. If you want to use that side, go right ahead. And then we have a square of Whisper White and a square of Night of Navy. And then we have that little piece of linen thread that we'll add at the end. So to get started here, let me get this out of the way too. We don't need those. Okay, to get started, I'm going to use a little bead of liquid glue on the back of my designer series paper. And remember, it takes just a very small amount of that glue, and you don't want to use too much and have it squeeze out around the edges anyway. So I'm going to take that and center that on my piece of white cardstock, so there's just a really narrow little border showing around there. And what's nice when you're using the liquid glue is it does give you the opportunity to slide that and reposition it before the glue dries if you didn't get it straight on your first try, because I can see that I have a little bit more space on one side than the other. So there we go, slide that over and even it out a little bit. And then the next step, we're going to layer this on top of the navy cardstock and give it like about a ½ an inch or so exposed to the left and to the bottom. So I'm not going to put my glue all the way up in the corner there. I'm going to concentrate my glue on this part of the layer. And okay, come on. There we go. And you'll see that I usually do leave that laying flat when I'm not using it so that it is a little easier to get it to flow towards the tip. But use my grid paper here to help me position. So if I go 2 lines over and 2 lines up, that gives me about ½ an inch. And press that down. And then we'll set that to the side a minute because we're going to start stamping on our card base using that square image from our set. And again, for those that are joining me for World Card Making Day, I'm mostly just using the D block, just so I'm using the same block throughout the day rather than grabbing different sizes for every project. We're going to open up that early espresso brown stamp pad. And what I want to do is I want to kind of concentrate some stamping on the lower left and then a little bit on the upper right, and that center portion is going to be covered with our other layers, so we don't really need to stamp there. And you can see on the sample I did previously that what I'm going to do is I'm going to stamp and then stamp again without re-inking, so that I get a little bit lighter tone there in the brown. And then I'm going to go ahead and flip it around and stamp it a 3rd time there without re-inking. And you can see how I get that super dark brown, more of a medium tone, and then a lighter one. And then I'll go up here and add one up in the top right. And that takes care of that. So I'll clean that stamp off there. I'm using my stamp and scrub pad for cleaning. I like this one because it gets into those little nooks and crannies really well for cleaning the more detailed stamps. Okay, so again, we'll set that over to the side, and now we're going to work on our scrap with the feather. And ink that up with the early espresso. And now I don't want a super dark brown feather, so I'm going to stamp off on my grid paper first. As you see how that's really, really dark, and I want more of a medium brown. So stamp off on the grid paper, and then I'll stamp my feather on my scrap. I'll clean that off, and you know what I should have done before I started with the feather? I want to stamp that greeting, and I'm using the one that says "You are the best," and I'm going to stamp that in espresso as well, and I'm going to stamp that kind of close in the corner of my scrap. And it doesn't matter whether you get it perfectly straight or not, because we're going to cut that out with scissors and separate the words before we place it on the card. But I want to make sure I got that in there and didn't use up too much of my scrap with the feathers and not have room for that. So now we're done with the early espresso ink. Whoops, wrong side. Still getting used to the new style ink pads. I'm used to my old ones, which the Night of Navy is the older style that opens and closes a little bit differently. Okay. And now I'm going to put the feather back on my clear block, and I'm going to stamp a couple feathers with the Night of Navy. Okay, and that takes care of the stamping for this card. Put my cleaned stamp back in the case and close up the ink pad so I don't accidentally stick my fingers in it when I'm reaching for something else. Oh, there we go. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and cut out our feathers. So you'll take your sharp scissors for that, and just, if you're not used to doing fussy cutting, I'll tell you one thing that seems to work for me is to kind of hold the scissors in place and move your cardstock when you're going around those curves. And then we get this long stretch here. And then I'll start moving the cardstock into the scissors. And then go along that long side here. And duck into some of those crevices. And don't worry about, trying to get it perfect. Just give it some little curves and stuff. And then what I like to do, just to make that feather a little more realistic, is kind of take some little nips into the feather in some of those spots where you see spaces. So we'll do that a couple of times along this side. If I get a hold, there we go, get that piece out of there. And then I'll go over and do it a couple of times on this side. And then what I like to do, just to give that a little bit of a more realistic curve to the feather, is go ahead and run my thumbnail right down the center there. And you can see how after I've done that, that kind of gives it a little bit of curl, makes it a little more three-dimensional. And I am not going to torture you by making you sit here and watch me cut out the rest of the feathers. So I pre-cut my navy feathers just to save us a little bit of time. So then I'm going to go back and cut out my words from my sentiment. And like I said, I am intentionally cutting that, not perfectly. I don't care if everything's perfectly straight. In fact, I kind of want to get some little angles in there. Then I'll take these shorter words and trim a little of the excess off here. Like I said, you want imperfect. You don't want perfectly straight angles on that. So now we'll start putting everything together. Take that piece that I'd done earlier and apply some liquid glue to the back of that. And again, it doesn't take a whole lot. Kind of do that so it's got even space on the top and the two sides, and kind of overlaps down into the stamping that we did at the beginning. And press that into place, and then we'll start gluing our sentiment on. Again, just a tiny little bit of glue on the back there is all you need. And get a hold of that. My nails are too short. And then just go ahead and glue those down on the lower right part of that wood grained piece. And like I said, I'm purposely making them a little bit crooked, not trying to get them straight. Wipe off some of that glue. That glue does dry clear, but sometimes it can be a little shiny, so try to get the excess off before it dries. Okay, so there's that part. And now we start doing our feathers. And for the feathers, you just want to put the glue towards the base. You don't want to put a whole lot on there. And just start spacing those so that they're kind of hanging off the edge. Yeah, I think it's almost time to open a new glue container. That one seems to be getting low. And keep in mind, you want to put the base of the feathers overlapping, kind of touching each other, because we're going to put that linen thread bow on there. And then this one on top of the other two, kind of press it down. So I want this end to be flatter, but I don't want to squash the other end where I've given it the curl. And we'll take that piece of linen thread and tie it into a bow. And I'll cut that long string off a little bit. And then just put a little dot of glue right there. Glue that bow into place. And we are pretty much done there. Now, if you'd like to go ahead and stamp the inside of your card, feel free to do so. Maybe put a little feather down at the bottom there, something like that. And same with your envelope. If you want to go ahead and stamp some feathers or some of the squares to coordinate with your card on the front corners of your envelope or across the flap, feel free. I'm not going to do that on camera right now just for the sake of brevity. But there we go. There's a nice little feather card that you could send to anyone on your card list. Like I say, it's a little bit more of a masculine look, but certainly not something that anyone would enjoy. And if you're joining me for World Card Making Day, don't forget to click the files link at the top of the page and you'll find the downloadable PDF with all the measurements and written instructions for the card. If you are seeing this video on YouTube, you can go to my blog at greetingsandmemories.com to find the relevant information. And if you're interested in purchasing any Stampin' Up! Products, such as our Tasteful Touches stamp set, you can do that at cindylyon.stampinup.net. Thank you for joining me. See you again soon.